Welcome to Stable and Farm Legal Podcast Series, your trusted source for discussions on agriculture and equine-related topics, with a special focus on Oklahoma and beyond. Whether you're a farmer, rancher, equestrian, or simply curious about the intersection of law and farming and ranching, you have come to the right place. Before we get started, though, we'd like to remind you this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. For specific legal concerns, please consult a licensed attorney in your area. Stable and Farm Legal is based in Oklahoma and proud to bring you this podcast with the assistance of advanced AI technology. Please note our hosts are created using AI, and any resemblance to a real person's voice is purely coincidental. Now let's dive into today's podcast and explore the legal and practical sides of life in ag and all things equine. See you on the other side.
Right, we've got a stack of documents here, straight from the Federal Register.
Yeah.
And it looks like the USDA is giving the Horse Protection Act, the HPA, a pretty major makeover.
Yeah, a serious overhaul.
Really focusing on cracking down on soaring. And, from what I'm seeing here, these changes are going to be pretty big, especially for Tennessee walking horse and racking horse shows.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So,
big changes.
I mean, one of the things that kind of jumps out at me is that the USDA is basically saying, hey, that system we had with industry-appointed inspectors, it wasn't really working.
Right. They're kind of admitting that that wasn't the best approach.
You have those DQPs?
Yeah, the designated qualified persons.
Yeah.
Right. So for years, these horse industry organizations, the HIOs, they were in charge of training and licensing these DQPs to try to identify soaring.
Yeah.
But a lot of the USDA's data suggesting that some of these DQPs might have been, turning a blind eye, overlooking some violations.
It's like putting the fox in charge of the hen house, right?
A little bit, yeah.
So you're saying the USDA actually found evidence that the people who were supposed to be policing soaring might have been part of the problem.
Potentially, yeah. And it's a pretty big deal.
That is huge.
Yeah. So back in 2010, the USDA Inspector General actually did an audit.
Okay.
And they found some pretty serious conflicts of interest with some of these DQPs.
Wow.
And then on top of that, the USDA sent some of their own vets to observe DQP inspections. And the violation rates went way up, sometimes over 1,300% higher.
That is alarming.
And then even the National Academy of Sciences, which is a very well-respected independent body, they concluded that the whole DQP system was failing.
So for those listening who maybe aren't as familiar with soaring, can you give us just a quick explanation of what it is and why it's such a problem?
Yeah, so essentially soaring is the practice of intentionally inflicting pain on a horse's front legs and hooves. And trainers do this to force the horse to perform this really exaggerated high-stepping gait.
Okay.
That's prized in certain show rings.
So they're lifting their legs higher and faster to try to avoid the pain?
Exactly, yeah. It's all about creating an artificial gait just for the sake of winning.
That's just awful.
It is. It's been going on for way too long, and the Horse Protection Act was first passed way back in 1970 to try to stop it.
Right.
But as we're seeing, with these DQP issues, it's been a real challenge to enforce.
Yeah.
And these new amendments are aiming to really fix that.
So the USDA is not scrapping the HPA, they're just totally overhauling it.
Exactly. Yeah, they're giving it a complete makeover.
So what's the solution here?
So APHIS, that's the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, they're taking over. They're going to be the ones in charge of training and authorizing a brand new force of inspectors. And these are called HPIs, Horse Protection Inspectors.
Okay.
They're like the new sheriffs in town, laser focused on stopping soaring. And they'll have access to a way wider range of tools, everything from just visual checks to even diagnostic tests. So it's going to be a lot harder to hide any signs of soaring.
It seems like they're really stepping up their game.
They are.
But what about all those sort of, iconic things you see at some of these gated horse shows, like the big tall stacks of pads and those chains that hit the horse's legs?
Right. Are
those still allowed?
That's a really big point of contention with these new rules.
I bet.
So action devices, those weighted chains that slap against the horse's legs, those are completely banned.
Okay.
For Tennessee walking horses and racking horses, and pads and wedges, which are often used to create that exaggerated gait.
Right.
Those are also out. Unless a licensed vet prescribes them for, like, therapeutic reasons.
I can imagine that's causing quite a stir in those show communities.
Absolutely, because
it's been part of the tradition for so long.
yeah, and some people are arguing that those items aren't always used for soaring and that this ban is a little bit of an overreach.
Right.
They're saying it's going to hurt their traditions, their livelihoods,
Right.
and they're also worried about what it's going to do to the industry.
Yeah, like economically.
Exactly. You know, will people still be interested in participating in these shows?
No, if they don't have those elements.
Right. But on the other hand, you know, if these practices are causing pain and suffering to the horses,
Right.
then something has to change.
For sure.
And that's the USDA's position.
Yeah.
They're saying that the connection between those devices and soaring is just too strong to ignore,
Yeah.
especially with all those high violation rates they've seen.
Right, particularly in those paddock classes.
Exactly.
So it sounds like a really tough spot for everyone to be in.
Yeah.
Are these new rules in effect yet?
So most of them go into effect February 1st, 2025.
Okay, so coming right up.
Yeah, very soon. But the authorization of these new HPIs, that actually started earlier, back in June of 2024.
So the clock is ticking.
It is.
And it's not just trainers who are affected by these changes, right?
Yeah.
We saw in these documents that show management's going to have a bigger role to play, too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, show organizers are going to have a lot more responsibility
Okay.
and a lot more scrutiny.
So what does that look like?
Well, they have to provide suitable places for inspections to happen. They have to prevent anyone from tampering with the horses after they've been inspected.
Wow.
And they have to report a ton more information to the USDA. Things like how many horses are at the show.
Oh, wow.
Whether they're using an HPI, all sorts of stuff.
So really a lot more oversight.
Way more oversight.
Now, what happens if, trainers or show managers don't comply with these new HPA regulations?
Oh, the penalties can be really serious.
Like what?
We're talking big fines, disqualifications from competitions.
Wow.
And in some cases, even prison time.
The USDA is really putting their foot down this time.
They are, sending a very clear message that soaring's not going to be tolerated.
It sounds like it, but I know there have been some calls to delay these new rules a bit.
Yeah, you're right. Both the American Horse Council and the U.S. Equestrian Federation have come out and said, we're a little bit concerned. Can we have a little more time to adapt?
So they want to hit the pause button.
Right.
Are they totally against the changes, or is it more nuanced than that?
It seems like it's more about the speed of the implementation than being completely opposed.
Okay.
They're saying the industry needs more time to really understand these new rules,
Right.
adjust their practices. They're worried that if it's too rushed, it's going to lead to a lot of confusion, maybe some unintended consequences.
Right.
So they're not saying no to the changes. They're just asking for a smoother transition.
So a little bit more time to kind of get everything in order.
Right.
But there's also this other layer of dissent. That really digs into the USDA's reasoning behind all these changes.
Right.
Can you tell me more about that?
So the USDA really relied on the data from these inspection tables, which showed a lot higher violation rates when the APHIS vets were there. And they used that to justify all these big changes. But some people are questioning how valid that data actually is.
Interesting. Tell me more.
They're saying that these tables don't really distinguish between minor infractions and actual cases of soaring. So they're saying it lumps all these minor issues in with actual soaring, which makes the problem look a lot worse than it really is.
So it's kind of a matter of interpretation?
Yeah.
They're saying the USDA might be overstating the problem based on how they're looking at the data.
Exactly.
Right.
And some folks are also questioning the way the data was collected in the first place.
How so?
They're suggesting that maybe the APHIS inspectors were more likely to target horses they already suspected of being sored.
So they're basically suggesting that maybe the data is skewed to support the USDA's agenda.
That's the gist of it, but it's important to note that the USDA completely denies those claims.
Okay.
They're standing by their data and insisting that it clearly shows that we need these stricter regulations.
So we've got the supporters who are applauding the crackdown on soaring. We've got the industry folks who want more time to adapt.
Right.
And then we've got those who are questioning the data used to justify it all.
Right. It's
Definitely a complex situation with no easy answers.
Yeah.
But maybe we can untangle it a little bit further.
Okay.
I think it's important to look closely at some of the specific changes.
Yeah.
Like this new dermatological conditions indicative of soaring rule. That's basically replacing the old SCAR rule, right?
Right, but it's much broader.
Yeah, let's dive into that next.
Okay. So the old SCAR rule really just focused on visible scars that maybe would suggest soring.
Okay, so this new rule, the DCIS, dermatological conditions, indicative of soring. It means inspectors are looking at a lot more than just scars.
Exactly, yeah. It's any kind of skin change, irritation, swelling, even hair loss. The idea is that even subtle changes could be signs of past soring.
So they're trying to catch soring, whether it's happening right now or whether it happened a while ago.
Yeah, trying to close those loopholes.
So it's a much more comprehensive approach?
It is, but it hasn't gone over well with everybody.
Oh, I bet. What are people saying?
Well, the biggest concern is false positives.
Okay.
Critics are arguing that a lot of things can cause those skin changes.
Sure.
Bug bites, old injuries, and they're worried that horses with legitimate issues could be unfairly disqualified.
So they're saying this DCIS rule is too broad, it's casting too wide a net? It might end up penalizing horses that haven't actually been sored.
Yeah, and they're saying it gives too much power to the inspectors.
Right.
A horse could be penalized for something as minor as a scrape.
That's a valid point. What does the USDA say to that?
Well, they acknowledge that, yeah, these skin changes can be caused by a lot of different things. But they're saying that the HPIs will be trained to know the difference between something that's legitimate and something that's a real sign of soring.
So it really comes down to the expertise of the inspectors.
In a lot of ways, yeah. And the USDA insists that these new HPIs are going to be very highly trained and qualified.
Well, I hope so, for everyone involved.
Me too.
But it also makes me think about how these regulations are enforced.
Yeah.
It's not just about catching people who are soring horses. It's about changing the whole culture around it, right?
You're absolutely right.
Like the USDA wants people to just start thinking about it differently.
Yeah, a change in mindset.
Yeah, move towards ethical training methods from the start.
Exactly, because punishment alone isn't going to fix it.
Right. It's got to be more about understanding why soring is wrong and choosing better ways to train your horses.
It's about the well-being of the horse.
Making sure these animals can compete and they're not in pain.
That's the goal.
Speaking of competing, we've talked about the impact on trainers and show management.
Right.
What about the horses themselves? How are they going to be affected by all this?
Well, if it works the way it's supposed to, we should see a lot less soring.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and that means horses won't have to go through all that pain and discomfort just to compete.
That would be amazing.
It would.
But you mentioned earlier, there are those concerns about the false positives with this DCIS rule.
Right.
So what happens if a horse is flagged and it turns out it wasn't actually sored?
Well, that's obviously a big disappointment for the owner and the trainer. It raises questions about fairness, for sure.
Is there anything they can do about it? Like, is there an appeals process?
Yeah, there is. The new regulations actually outline an appeals process.
Okay.
Owners and trainers can challenge disqualifications, and they can provide evidence to support their case, which is important.
That's good.
Checks and balances.
Yeah.
It's going to be tricky for everyone navigating these new rules.
What would you tell someone who's involved in these shows? Like, what should they do?
Well, the biggest thing is just really read the rules.
Yeah.
Familiarize yourself with all the details. The USDA has a ton of information online.
Don't just rely on what other people are saying.
Exactly. Get it straight from the source.
So really important to understand the details.
Yeah, and remember, it's not just about avoiding those penalties. It's really about making a commitment to the welfare of the horse.
Treating the animals humanely.
Yeah, making sure they don't have to suffer to compete.
Well said.
So we've talked about the pads and the chains, but there's also this other piece of the new regulations about using substances on the horse's legs.
Yeah, that's another big change, right?
It is. The new rules specifically say you can't use any substance that would hide soring.
So things like numbing agents or irritants.
Exactly.
Things that would mask the pain.
Yeah, and for Tennessee walking horses and racking horses, any foreign substance on their legs is considered a violation.
Wow, they're not messing around.
Nope. Cracking down on anything that could be used to hide soring.
So this is where those licensed vets are really important.
They are.
They'll be able to tell if there's something suspicious going on.
That's right. And the USDA is going to be working closely with veterinary organizations to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Okay. So we've talked about the old system, why it wasn't working, the USDA stepping in, the new inspectors, the ban on certain equipment, this DCIS rule, what show management needs to do, and now these restrictions on substances.
It's a lot.
Is there anything else we're missing?
I think we've hit all the main points.
Okay.
But this is really just the beginning.
Right.
These changes are going to have a big impact on the whole industry, and it's going to take a while to see how it all shakes out.
Will it actually get rid of soring?
That's the big question.
What's it going to do to the economics of it all?
Mm.
Are new problems going to pop up?
Good questions.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, I think the answers depend on a lot of different things. How well the industry adapts, how committed people are to horse welfare.
It's a big moment for these breeds.
It is.
And for the whole Horse Protection Act.
Yeah, definitely a turning point.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
It will.
And we'll be here to keep you updated.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode from Stable and Farm Legal Podcast Series. We hope you found this discussion insightful and engaging. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. If you have specific legal questions, we encourage you to consult with a qualified attorney. This podcast is proudly produced by Stable and Farm Legal in Norman, Oklahoma, with the assistance of advanced AI technology. And remember, the hosts are created using AI, and any resemblance to real persons' voices is purely coincidental. Be sure to subscribe and tune in for our next episode, where we will continue to explore the unique intersection of law, agriculture, and equine management. Until then, take care, and we hope you join us next time.